Hi, this is Len Edgerly. Welcome to the Kindle Chronicles podcast, Season 2, Episode 4. I'm recording the voiceover today, Sunday, October 24th in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And this episode is going to contain a conversation that I had earlier this week, Tuesday, October 19th, with my father, who is 94. And I traveled out to the place where he lives west of Boston, and we had a wide-ranging conversation. I've been looking forward to this for a while because my conversations with Dad are always fascinating, and any one of them could have been recorded for the podcast because the way his mind works, you'll hear how sharp he is and how thoughtful he is on how many different topics. And I had told him I'd like to have him be my guest on the season, and as it came up to this visit earlier this week, I thought, I think today's the day. And he was very happy to do it, and so that's what this episode will be about. I was recording on my iPhone as I entered the building and filled out the information on the scanner for the COVID prevention or control at the place. And then after that, I'll take an elevator up. I didn't record the elevator ride up to the 6th floor. So the next thing you'll hear is I'm knocking on his door, and his housekeeper, Marie, is there, greets me. Annie, her dog, is there for a little soundscape. And then Dad is sitting at the dining room table, and he greets me, and he's ready for our conversation. It's a little breezy out, a nice fall day west of Boston in Massachusetts, and I'm walking into the community where Dad lives, and I think we're going to have a talk. We've been talking about doing an interview with him on the show for a while, and this feels like the right day to do it. So we're coming in, and there's a very sensible logging in procedure here where he lives, where you tap your way in to identify yourself and say who you're visiting, and then there's a reading of the temperature so that you can see if you're risking anything, bringing anything into the community. They've done a really good job controlling COVID here since, for the almost 2 years now. Oh, hello, Annie. How are you? Hi, guys.
Hi, Len. How are you?
Good, Marie. How are you?
Not too bad, John.
Yeah, well, I'm doing a little recording for the podcast here.
Okay.
Is he in the... Oh, you're at the table. How are you? Good to see you.
Nice to see you. Well,
What a great spot to be.
Yes, it's beautiful.
I'm recording a little intro here in case I use it, but just a little color, coming up the elevator. The elevator dings.
Barking dog.
And the barking dog. Thank you, Annie.
Yes,
I'll have to have Annie's agent sign a release. Dad has lived in his retirement community for a little over 3 years now, and it's been fascinating to me just to see how he has adjusted to it. There's some big adjustments in that period, most notably the loss of my mother 2 years ago, August of 2019. And then his getting used to living there and making friends and having a very full life, kind of his own design. He was a CEO and a man of great accomplishment and activity in his career. And now in his 90s, in his 10th decade, as he and I like to refer to it, he has created a life that I find quite inspiring. So to give you a feel for that, I just began asking him how he started his day. That was Tuesday of this week.
Well, I'm a very sort of systematic person when it comes to how to spend the day. So I get up about 6 o'clock, and one of the early things that I do is to ask Alexa what time it is. And she tells me, of course, with great accuracy. And then I have just a routine and get going and have what I used to call a pre-breakfast, which is to have apple juice with some, what do they call it, citrusel in it. Mm-hmm. And read what's on the iPhone, the emails, which is always a stack of maybe 50 for the previous day. But I can cover that while I'm having my pre-breakfast. Then I decide if I have time to have the real breakfast, which is a scone and some coffee. Mm-hmm. And by that time, they've delivered the newspapers out at my door.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great regularity as it lends itself to connecting with my timing very well. The paper is there. I go and bring it in and read the paper and wait for Marie to show up.
Now, which papers are generally showing up at the door?
It's the Globe, the Herald, and the Wall Street Journal.
Mm-hmm.
And I read them in that order. I read the Globe at the front page and get the coverage. The Herald, I read some just aspects of it that I find interesting usually. But really luxuriating on the Wall Street Journal with the coffee and the scone in the living room. And I just have enough time there before Marie shows up around 9.
Are you watching TV while you're scanning the papers, or is it time without the TV?
I have the TV news on silent.
Oh.
And so I'm reading the newspaper, and if something looks like it, some persona that I'd like to watch, that I put on the sound.
Oh, I see.
So it's all very systematic.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I have the leftover carryover from the previous day. Mm-hmm. And I'm very much attached to this project, what I call my 10th decade. Mm-hmm. You and I did that book that I've been so happy to have done called 9 Decades.
Yep.
And it ends on a certain condition at the time, which was all pretty good. Everything was going okay with the country. And it ended in some thoughts about the future, long range for myself. But it sort of begs the question, well, what about that 10th decade? Well, if there is a 10th decade, and it turns out that I'm already just almost halfway through the 10th decade, and I'm calling it the fateful decade.
The fateful decade.
Fateful, because it has a lot of things to worry about, particularly in foreign affairs.
Right.
And we have 4 countries that would like to dislodge us in our leadership role in the U.S. in the world: China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. And so what I've got is sort of a running draft. I'm calling it a book digest. And it covers, so far, events and new ideas, you might say, that took place during that period, which is generally a downward trend. I started out, I thought it was going to be mainly about public affairs. Going to be a kind of a weighty book. And I began to realize it's not complete if it doesn't include the family. So I've ended up saying I want America to be strong and free and my family to be happy. And those are the objectives. And so in the course of writing about the family, I've become aware of the idea of emerging characteristics. And I think if you read it, sometime in the future, when these are adults, you say, gee, I saw that when she was 4 years old. And the first awareness, for example, that Willa was a good singer and had a beautiful voice, was it comes about in the course of passage of time with the family. And I can remember one time when I had a discussion, Lois and I, with Jesse, and he was wanting to be a professional skateboarder. And I can remember so clearly, I said, Jesse, I don't think you have the inherent characteristics of being a professional. You have to be built a certain way, and it's just a difficult challenge. And he was angry, and he said, I don't use the word inherent. And I think to myself, and I've got that, I'm going to have that in the book, because it's at some point in time, and it's consistent with what we've seen since that time with his characteristics. Hello, Dalton.
I was glad for this interruption to our interview because it's an example of the very full social life that Dad has entered into in his community. Dalton is a weekly dinner guest with 2 other men, and their conversations are lively, wide-ranging, and Dad really looks forward to them. And I always enjoy getting a recap of them the morning after he's had one of his dinner conversations with not just these 3 gentlemen, but lots of other people at the place where he lives. That's one of your dinner partners for tonight?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There's four of us that have a dinner every Tuesday night. It's a very nice, we're very congenial, obviously. The person who instigated it is your friend Peter Guttis.
Right.
And he's having an eye operation today, a serious eye operation. So he won't be able to be present. And Dalton was just checking to make sure that we were in fact going to get together, which we had more or less covered previously.
Who's the third that'll be there tonight?
His name is Lang Stevenson. And he has lived near here for a period of time on a farm, actually. And he's a very, very unusually pleasant person to be with. And one of his focal points is birds.
Birds.
And he knows so much about birds. He's a bird watcher.
Yeah.
And he has plenty to say about birds and what we have around here, and what breeds and species they are, and so on. So he adds that to it. And
what's Dalton's specialty?
Dalton is books.
Yeah.
And he's the head of the library group here. One of the books that Dalton recommended to Dad a while back was The Second Most Powerful Man in the World, The Life of William D. Leahy, Roosevelt's Chief of Staff. It's by Phillips, Payson, O'Brien, published in 2019 by Dutton. I'll have a link to it in the show notes. The significant thing was that he had very, very much authority in the Roosevelt administration. And his opinion accounted for a lot.
Yeah, and yet he hadn't really heard about him that much, so he was kind of a background figure that you get to understand.
Well, that's right. I'd never heard of him as far as that went, but he was thought to be the book title itself, I think, said number 2 in the U.S. government.
Yeah.
It was partly because of his strength of personality.
I see.
His personal qualities.
Yeah. And then the fourth regular is Peter, who's sort of the convener in a way. What does he usually contribute to the conversation?
He's an educator. He was the head of the Buckingham, Brown and Nichols School for about 15 years.
He also interviewed me when I applied for Harvard from Belmont Hill, and apparently gave a green light to admitting this.
I'd say that's one of his other main accomplishments. I've always been totally aware of that. But he's a very, very personable and intelligent person. And he and I just like talking about education all the time at schools.
Yeah.
So he has that to contribute, but he's quite active.
Getting the eye operation today, right?
He has his left eye has been a problem for him.
Yeah.
And he's had 1 or 2 operations already.
Right.
This is kind of a very major one. So we're hoping for him. I will leave a get well card for him later today.
Good. And he's been pretty active in kind of the running of the place here, that committees and philanthropy and things like that.
Yes, and one of his roles, which I think he cherishes as much as any, is the chairman of the scholarship committee. And this is rather unusual in the fact that we have a scholarship fund, and everybody contributes to it, and it's a substantial amount, so that the staff receive in lieu of tips. We have no tipping.
Here's a reminder.
Oh, I hope it picked that up. This is Alexa reminding you what?
Take your prune juice.
Alexa, stop. And that happens every day at 11?
Oh, yes, every day at 11.
Have you taken the prune juice yet?
No, not yet, but if I haven't, I'll be reminded of it.
And if you forget Alexa's reminder, Marie will remind you.
Right, and Alexa has already reminded me about my morning medications.
Okay, that's good.
It's very effective, and then for some reason I get the message twice. So I come through each message, I hear it once, and then I hear it again. And we've got these devices, as you know, all through the apartment.
Yep.
so you can't miss what she's telling you.
Well, and I used to have you on my Amazon account, so when I was getting a lot of advice to take my prune juice on my Alexa devices at home, and it made me smile. It never did tempt me to try this stuff.
I was wondering whether it made you try it out. I happen to like the prune juice. So.
Good. Yeah, it has good medicinal advantages.
Yeah. But just to continue a little bit on the broad thrust of my project, which I am more and more aware of the value of it in this life that I have here, is my major project.
Yeah.
And it has increased interest because of adding the family as a subject. Mm-hmm. And so whenever something significant happens in that regard, it goes into this. On my iPhone, I have the whole book is in the iPhone.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So I think what we've set up pages on your iPhone.
Yeah.
That's also on your MacBook.
Yeah.
So if you're going to update your book or your digest, as you're calling it, was maybe something that's in the news, like the supersonic missile thing. How do you do that actually with your iPhone?
There is a Pages app, which I hit Pages, and then I hit record.
And you're tapping the microphone so you're able to speak to it.
Yeah, speak to it, which I really enjoy being able to do it orally.
Yeah.
And it uses its own discretion now and then to correct a thought, which I find usually useful. Uh-huh. And so the same way with the family events or something that's been in the newspapers, I've had something in there this morning about hypersonic missiles, mm-hmm. and very, very relevant. And particularly the idea is that when you put something in 2021 and you're looking at it in 2027, my 100th year, and you look back and you say, well, he was aware of what was going on back there in 2021.
Right.
And then I have become very recently the significance of the word awareness, because it's the awareness or lack of awareness that determines the success or failure of a society, mm-hmm. or of a family. And the Wall Street Journal editorial this morning was that we really have to be aware of the threat of Chinese military expansion. And I put that in the iPhone. And so the book itself is, I knew it would work this way, that my perception of what I'm doing with the book and why is evolving.
Right.
But it's evolved in the direction of the strong and free America. And then as I have thought further about what I mean by that it turns out, I believe, that the world is divided between free nations and unfree nations. And the unfree nations are the four major adversaries then their of course, alliances with others. But the thinking of the United States in terms of a strong and free nation is central. And then the question of what are some of the threats we face, like Islamism, for example. Mm-hmm. The value of the approach that I have is that these are very broad issues, and you confine yourself to certain issues such as strength, and then you put your thought into that basket.
Right.
And so when you end up sometime in the future, I'm thinking of maybe doing an interim book for the first 5 years, which ends next February. Uh-huh. And it's going to be very interesting to see how that all falls into place, because it's a evolving awareness.
Yeah.
And it's what I'm enjoying very much is the awareness of that process, and it's not only in terms of public policy issues of that sort, but also in the family.
Yeah. So when you think of awareness as a concept or something important in the public sphere, being aware of the threat, as you say, how does that translate when you think of the goal of having the family be happy?
The goal that I tended to articulate for myself is help them to be happy, and by what contributions I might make to their futures. So I've helped with the homes where they live, and Education is a major issue, and it's so interesting that this year is the year that became such a big factor, because it's the year when several of them entered school for the first time. Mm-hmm. And then the whole process of the parents trying to figure out where do they want their children to go to school.
Yeah.
And that's all ended up with a good answer. Everything is resolved, and where the kids are going to school is turning out just what I would hope for.
And these are the great-grandchildren.
Great-grandchildren.
And you have quite a rhythm of connection with you've got 5 grandchildren.
Yeah.
And how many great-grandchildren?
11.
And so how are you using technology just to have a regular peek into the lives of all of these people?
I have an arrangement that I talk with you and Steffi just about every day. Mm-hmm. And it's usually on either FaceTime or Echo. Mm-hmm. And then the 5 grandchildren are central to it, because I have an arrangement that each of them talk with me one day a week at a certain specified time. So every Friday, for example, I might be talking with Rue at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The kids are back from school. How did school go?
And you get to see Ryan and Jake.
They briefly will allow themselves to be seen on the screen. Uh-huh. And so it's over a period of time, it gives me a feeling I'm really in good touch with those families. And through the parents, so the key people are the grandchildren, and then I ask them how the great-grandchildren are doing. Mm. But the other thing, which is wonderful, is we got here right on this table where you and I are sitting, something called a skylight.
Yeah.
And it's a screen, and the pictures go across at 10 seconds per picture. And they got pictures coming in from all over, because each of the people participating can send an email picture.
Right.
And it turns on that screen. And so that's a marvelous way of staying in touch.
It's fun. I add to this stream with my own photos, and I'm seeing some that hear some from Ocean Park, but they're intermixed with what other people are sending you. So you're getting sort of a family live feed, which changes every day, because most of us put up new material each day.
Yeah, the word live feed is right appropriate, and it's quite fascinating.
I didn't realize the pictures change so quickly. You've got to kind of...
and then, of course, you can control that by putting it on pause if you want to.
Oh, I see, right.
And
then you can go to a gallery and find other pictures. And then sometimes you see pictures from 40 years ago. How do those show up?
Well, they'll show up in the gallery.
And that's because Steffi is finding things in the archive.
Yes.
And you'll see a picture of Mom that'll go across along with all of these.
Well, that's one of the things that happened, is that I didn't start out being able to see Lois, and because of Steffi's initiative, she comes up every once in a while.
That's great. That's a great idea.
And so and I have the screen over in the other part of the room as well. So look at that. There's Willa.
Yeah, and these are videos. So Jesse sent some video. They're on a little train going through some kind of a park. Yeah,
there's a lot of videos come through.
That's pretty adorable.
Yeah, and, they're great. And then if I like the picture, I want to let them know I hit this heart down there.
Yeah, and when you do that, I get an email saying that one of my photos was favorited by you.
Yes.
It makes me feel good.
Yes, I enjoy being able to communicate. Look at that. That's little bow.
Yeah.
He's so photogenic. Some of his artwork.
Yeah. No, this is a great feature.
Yeah.
I remember when this was there they are dancing around.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure that we would be able to put up enough content to make it interesting for you, but boy, that sure has been the case.
I know. Look like that. It's 10 seconds, and they're prancing around,
dancing around.
Very delightful.
Yeah.
So that's another factor of life, I guess you'd say, in my 10th decade. The technology is a very nice tool, I guess, to enrich the period.
Well, and it's you can see that it's helpful on both strands of your book digest. That obviously you're connecting to the family in a way you couldn't without this technology, and then you're able to grab ideas from the news and put them into your iPhone, and then I guess from time to time, because you can pull up that Pages document on your computer, then you can print it out, and it's what's the value of seeing what you've done printed out on paper?
Very seldom.
Oh, yes.
They don't often print it out. My journal itself, as opposed to the family material.
Okay.
But I have a journal which I've written for years.
Right.
And it's all in there. I got about 20 books at this point.
Oh, my
loose leaf notebooks.
Yeah.
And if I want to know what I did in 1980, I can go back, and it's very detailed, as you all know, because you've done it yourself.
Yeah, and when we did the 9 Decades book, that was the source material for our conversations that led to that book.
Yeah, the beauty of that is you're sure of what you did because you wrote it down at the time.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's pretty valuable.
But it's been intriguing, interestingly to me. Every once in a while you have periods of, gee, I wonder if I'm doing what I want to be doing, and if I've got a little time left in life, should I be doing the same thing? And I increasingly value the fact that I'm writing that book.
Yeah.
And it's...
What's the satisfaction that comes with that, do you think?
It's the notion of having a plan.
Mm-hmm.
Because the book is really the account of what I did in a plan. And the plan is to live to be 100.
Right.
And join Lois.
Yeah.
And knowing that that's where I'm headed is very much a part of my life.
Yeah.
And I have some pictures of her in my bedroom there, and some poems that I've written about her. And I think it's helpful to me to have some sense of direction. It's always, of course, an issue if you think about a plan and the whole concept of certainty, is you know that you're going to be surprised or let down because things don't happen quite that way. But I'm quite aware of that, and I wrote one chapbook, I call them, called, the title was Certainty. Mm-hmm. And a subsection of that was creating certainty. Mm-hmm. And then I noted in my notes that are in the introduction of the book, it's foolish to even think anybody could create certainty. You can't do it. And then, so I have another chapbook, which is titled Happiness. And I've chosen to describe happiness as knowing you're going to live forever. Mm-hmm. And rejoin Lois. And so the book titled Happiness talks about the certainty that one derives by a life that is heading toward life hereafter. Well, why does that mean anything? I'd be foolish to suppose that I know what the future is. But I find it very enriching in life to believe that it makes a difference what you believe is going to happen and what kind of things that you're doing are on the right trail. And so that's where I've found myself evolving toward in this book. I'm finding it very delightful to think that I had the 9 decades, and there may in fact be one called my 10th decade. Another thing that's happened, as I think I may have said when we talked earlier, is the situation at the end of the first 9 decades was pretty favorable. Everything was going along pretty good in the world and in our country. And then things started to fall apart in the first half of my 10th decade. And so I think I'm going to have a rather short section of the first half. But what you don't know, and this is where I am right at this present moment, because I'm going to be 95 in February, and I look at that and I say, this is a momentous period right here.
Yeah.
And I hope that we find some things that will start to go the right way. But then you turn around and you say, yeah, okay, and so the Chinese come up with a hypersonic missile.
Yeah.
That is not in the right direction.
No, that's today's news.
Yeah. But the thing is, accompanies these inner thoughts are the external relationships that one develops. This may be significantly different in later life. If you're at a place like there's lots of people, just like the phone call that came in when we were talking about dinner tonight, and you have the opportunity for new acquaintances to develop, and it's taken for granted. the relationship between people at this stage of life, most of us at least in our 80s, mostly in the 90s, is to say that you're totally prepared to like the person you just met. And
why is that? Why are you more likely to have that expectation in your 80s or 90s than you had in your 40s and 50s?
Yes, definitely.
Why is that?
Because the possibility that there are some negative aspects of the person that you're meeting seem rather trivial when you consider that the relationship might not be very long-lasting.
Aha. It's precious because it's not going to go on forever.
I think so. And what does happen is that you, in the first place, you meet a new acquaintance. You spend a lot of the early things about where did you live and what are your family and where did you go to college. And in terms of the public affairs side, I like the idea of narrowing the organizations that I'm working with. So I have only 5.
Yeah.
And the people that are the rather key roles in those organizations will actually come and visit every now and then. Mm-hmm. And for example, I might have mentioned Heritage Foundation tomorrow is going to release a new index of military strength. Yeah. And I'm in touch with them right along. And I gave them some rather aggressive suggestions, which they usually the answer is yes, we're working on that, and I don't darn well that's the last they'll ever see of it.
You're not expecting to see any quotes from you in the final report?
There won't be any quotes, and I'm afraid there won't even be the same point of view, but I will at least have expressed my suggestions.
You won't have any regrets for not telling them what you think they should be saying.
I think when I have my response, my comments on the report, I will start from you already know what I think.
Yeah.
But it's a rather fascinating experience. I'm finding it that way, to be in your 10th decade.
It's fascinating to think of your 10th decade as a time when you can be very engaged with your book digest, meeting people here, being drawn to the certainty of the afterlife and being with Mom.
Yeah.
And one thing I think you mentioned a few days ago that has to do with the relationships with people here is the art of conversation, because you have a pretty full schedule. Sometimes I can't get a booking because you've got people for lunches and coffee and supper. But in all of that, what have you learned in terms of what you can do to help a group of people at dinner or some other gathering just have a better conversation?
I have a perfect example last evening, because I have a couple that I've grown to like so much that I repeatedly have a meal with them. And we agreed that it would be nice to add a couple people, so we did. One of them is Dalton Avery, who is in my Tuesday night dinner sessions. And this was a nice case because they didn't know each other. And I was introducing the new couple to the other 2 people involved, the other couple. And what I discovered is that in that circumstance, my job is to get them to talk. Mm-hmm. And one of the men there had a lot to do with Japan in his career. And so it was a great opportunity to draw out experiences. And a couple of us had all had experiences related to Japan. So that made it pretty obvious which direction to go with it. But I know that toward the end of the conversation that we always are among the last to leave the dining room. And I thought to myself, gee, I got this anecdote, and I really think it's relevant, and it'd really be good to talk about it. And I deliberately said, no, you're not going to do that, because it's better to wait and see if one of the others has something to say, an anecdote that they want to tell. And so what I'm increasingly aware of is it's not as interesting to the other parties as to what you think about what your experience is, as it is to talk about their own, as we all know, talk about oneself.
Yeah.
And so I think I've established that I am a pretty good conversationalist in that respect.
Well, how would you, that seems brilliant to me, because I have stories, sometimes if I'm talking with someone, I say, boy, I really want to tell this story, and there doesn't seem to be time, and I sometimes have a little restraint, and I don't, and it really seems to work out better. But what are you looking for when you decide something is going to contribute to the conversation? What's the kind of the threshold of when you say, yeah, this story is good to be told? Why? How would you decide to not restrain it, but to let it come into the conversation?
What I kind of look for is a punchline. Because I have discovered that I leave that part of the conversation as thinking to myself, that went pretty well if I had something funny at the end to talk about.
Yeah.
Something memorable. I wish I could think of a good example. Mm-hmm. But it's just this sort of a stagecraft kind of a thing.
It is, yeah. It may be because you have some sense of the punchline or the memorable thing about that story.
Yeah.
Well, for one thing, it probably fits with what the other people have been talking about.
Clearly it should, yes.
And
for example, talking about Japan, we each of the three of us had anecdotes that you could tell, particularly about the culture or the language. And
well, you had that one. Did you tell the one about what the word partnership meant?
That's the one I wanted to tell about.
Oh, and you didn't?
I deliberately didn't.
Well, tell it now. It's a good story.
Well, we had a company in Japan that had some technology and markets that were related to our own, and we decided with them that we ought to build a new plant, a chemical plant, to produce the product together. And so we would have a joint ownership of a new company. And the question was, well, who owns what part of a new company? And we talked at this meeting with about, 5 or 10 of them and 2 of us. And we had a discussion which went on, and my partner and I, my colleague, and I spent a lot of effort trying to persuade them of what great partners we would be. You're going to really enjoy working with us and we with you because we're going to be partners. And the looks were starting to freeze and look a little bit frigid. And we had a Japanese person representing us and helping us with us. He said, I think we should have a little conference out in the hall. So the 3 of us went out in the hall, and he said, stop using that word partnership. In Japan, that means 50-50. And they were not interested in 50-50, and we weren't even asking for 50-50, but it looks as though we were. And so we went back into the other room, and I said, we've discovered something about our communication. We want you to know that we're not trying to have a 50% interest in a new company.
Because they wanted 51 and you would have 49? Or?
They would have a majority interest.
I see. And that probably led to a warmer reception.
You should have seen the faces, the expressions warm up.
Oh.
Yeah, another one is very closely related to that. I think it might have been later when I was in banking. But we had a new business relationship with the company, and I met with the middle management people, about 5 or 10, just to get acquainted. And
this is in Japan again?
In Japan again.
Mm-hmm.
And at one point in time, they were starting to ask me questions. And one of them said, what is your personal motto? And of course, I didn't have a personal motto, but I had to make one up. And I said, every success brings another success. Well, they all smiled. They thought that was great, they'd like that. And I thought, boy, that was good thinking.
Fast on your feet.
Yes. It happened to be, of course, honest and true.
Yeah.
There it was, just I hadn't ever thought about it quite that way. And from then on, it was a rather cordial conversation with these people who were going to be working with us at the middle management level.
That's interesting that they would have seen that as an important and valid question to ask you, that they would have expected somebody to have a personal credo or motto.
I thought so, and I thought it was a really intriguing I guess, indication of the importance of values. But they haven't come out in quite that way, just out of the blue. It was clearly important to all of the people that were sitting there in that conversation.
Yeah.
And I felt good about it because I knew that our values were shared. That was why we were going to be in business together.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and they found out that they were dealing with an optimist.
Yes, I know. Yes, we've had some very interesting conversations. Are you an optimist or not?
Yeah.
I had a nice occasion in which getting acquainted with a couple, and the ladies asked me at one point, are you an optimist or a pessimist? And I said, I'm a pessimist, because I was feeling pessimistic when I looked at things like the Chinese situation. And then later I said to myself, I think I'm going to send her a paper, a talk I gave, the subject of optimism, 35 years ago. And I happened to find it in my files here.
Yeah.
And I sent her a copy of it. And of course, it was talking about there was room for optimism even in the face of uncertainty. Mm-hmm. And so the next time we met, she told me she was very, very interested in reading that and getting a better idea of what I meant by optimism.
Yeah.
Incidentally, I started out that paper, because this was a while ago, I said, here's a definition of optimism. My son lives in Wyoming, and he's running for the Wyoming legislature as a Democrat, and he works for a public utility company. I said, that's my definition of an optimist.
I love that story.
They always like to say, well, did he win? I say, well, no.
No, not exactly. He learned a lot, and it was a valuable lesson.
Yeah.
Well, let's finish up with how long a drive is it from here to Mount Pleasant Cemetery, where you go each week with Marie to the grave, Mom's grave?
It's about between 10 and 20 minutes.
Right.
And it's beautiful scenery along the way. And so every Friday morning, she turns up here around 9 o'clock, and the first thing that we do is we go down to the car, and she drives, and we go there, and I am present with Lois. She goes and waters the plants and walks around, let me have some privacy. And then we often, as we leave, say, it's very nice to be here and feel her presence. Partly the beauty of it is she has worked for us for about 27 years.
Right.
And she and Lois were very close. And she and I share the same warmth of feeling to her and the same confidence in her presence.
Yeah.
And so that we didn't plan that. It just that it started out the very first Friday after the funeral service, and we've been doing it ever since.
More than 2 years now.
Yeah, 2.5 years.
When you say that you both feel her presence, are you a sense of any particular message she's giving you about life or appreciation for the setting? How do you experience her presence in those visits?
How I experiencing it is I just like being with her.
Yeah.
And I can't really say that there's a articulate conversation or along that line. Uh-huh. But and I think that Marie probably feels the same way. We just enjoy being with her.
Right.
It's possible to consider that you're with someone like that, even though they're not there, just because of your consciousness.
Yeah.
That's why. That's what goes on.
And it's real.
And it's real, and you know, in the first place, it's a beautiful setting.
Yeah. Describe the setting. What is it like?
The Mount Pleasant Cemetery started in 1846 in Sudbury. And we have a stone that my father would have selected. And I always, when I look at that stone, I say to myself, well, that's just exactly how he would have done it, because he'd like to have things done right. In fact, one of his slogans was, if a thing is worth doing, it's worth doing right. And I always give him credit for that and think about him and being there. And so you approach the stone. It has the family name on it, and on the back it has names: my father, my mother, Lois, and it's going to have my name. It has my name on it with a date left blank, and then there's a space there for you and for Steffi.
Yeah.
So if we're driving around the back of the stone, and I look at those names, and I've just given some pleasure just from that much certainty. And it's a lot of certainty. I mean, it's a lot of time and significance. So that's what happens, and she comes back, and we drive off, and very often we'll just we'll share our feelings about what it's like to be there and sense her presence.
Well, and the other wonderful aspect of it is that when you're parked there by the grave, what do you see when you look off through the woods?
If you look off to the left, you see the church where Lois and I were married.
Yeah.
And it's only about 200 yards away.
Yeah.
And it was that church began in 1640, and it has this wonderful old New England appearance with a steeple. And so, yes, when we first arrived, you go around a corner in this old Marlborough Road, and you know what you're going to see. You're going to see Sudbury Center. First thing you see is the Methodist Church, which is now Presbyterian Church, and the Grange Hall and the Town Hall. And then if you raise your sights a little bit and see beyond that, it's the First Parish Church Unitarian in Sudbury. And it's very rewarding. Both Marie and I share that enjoyment, the beauty of it, and the meaning, the significance of something that's unspoiled.
Yeah.
Very, very, very old and very, very unspoiled.
Certainty.
Yeah, there's certainty about that. Certainty is created by things that are tangible. That's why we have wedding rings and other things that I look around this apartment, and it's just because we saved the things that have significance.
Right. Paintings and the art.
Yeah. And so there's a great sense, while I'm here, that it's the right place to be.
Well, I think that's a good note to end our conversation. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure.
Well, I've enjoyed listening to that conversation again as I've edited it for you here to upload to the internet for the podcast. And I look forward to lots more conversations with Dad in the years ahead. It's great to be in person with him, of course. We also have great conversations when we're talking to each other through the Echo Show, and this will be the case when we're down in Florida for 4 months and when we're up in Maine. And so the regularity of my contact with him is really benefited by the technology, and when we're there face to face having a scone that Maria's prepared for us and pumpkin bread and coffee, it's even better. Of course, there's nothing that's as good as that. You may have heard some music toward the end of our conversation, and that's from a beautiful clock that my sister Steffi gave to Mom and Dad on their 70th anniversary. And I love the sound of it. It chimes on the hour. I think it's on the half hour and the quarter hour, too, so there's a lot of music that comes into his apartment there from the clock that my sister gave him. We are back in Cambridge. We've moved down from Maine, and we've doubled the size of our household since I last talked to you on the podcast. Our niece Liz is now living with us here in Cambridge. She's from Montana. She joined us in Bozeman. I picked up the new slightly used Tesla Model Y in Boulder, Colorado, drove it up to Bozeman, and then Liz joined us along with Lyra, her dog, a good-sized dog, a Lab Great Pyrenees mix, and her cat, Richard Parker. So they traveled with us 2,500 miles to Maine. Darlene and she were up in Maine for a while, and now we're all here in Cambridge. Everybody's getting to learn the space, and it's fun to watch the animals kind of get closer and closer to each other as they get to know each other. And Liz is an ER ICU nurse who plans to pursue her medical career here in the Boston area. And she's a remarkable young woman. She's also a great cook. She cooked us some trout tonight that I did the final cooking on the grill after she prepared it. And I love having these animals around. I mean, we now have 3 animals and 3 humans living under the same roof. And I just like getting to know them. The cat is, of course, a different creature. A friend of mine said cats don't have owners, they have staff. And clearly there's a difference between cats and dogs, and there's a difference between a 5-pound Miki, Sophie, and an 8-year-old, large, calm, beautiful dog, Lyra. But Lyra was a rescue dog from a reservation in Montana, so she had a very tough early life, and she ended up in a good spot, and I hope she likes it here in Cambridge. I am not sure who my next interview will be with, but though something will turn up. I'm enjoying the air and the schedule for the Kindle Chronicles, and I hope that these are showing up at a time that you enjoy listening to them. If you have any comments or questions, you can reach me at podchronicles@gmail.com. Now, probably the next episode might come up pretty early because I've got a review copy of the new Kindle Paperwhite, and I hope to put something up. I think the embargo comes off on Tuesday, so Tuesday or Wednesday, I'd love to just put something up to tell you what I think of this new Paperwhite. It's been announced and talked about, but nobody's able to talk about it who's actually used one until Tuesday, and I was very grateful that Amazon sent me one. That's it for the Kindle Chronicles from Cambridge, Massachusetts. Thanks very much for listening.